With me in person. This is quite an overwhelming crowd for my Passover learning. Not used to this. Usually get 6 or 7 people. I don't know what it is this year. There's a thirst for learning about Pesach, so I'll try and satisfy that. I want to note that this is a difficult time for the Jewish people. All the learning that we're doing, I hope, will be in the merit of our brothers and sisters in Israel who are going through a very hard time. And we hope that there are better days ahead, that they feel our intentions to be with them in body and in spirit, that they may know better days and an end to the violence that they're experiencing now, and maybe on the holiday of freedom, some more freedom spreading around the world in countries that whose citizens are crying out for freedom. This evening's class is not going to be traditional in the sense that I've done the classes before where we've gone through the Haggadah, and I do love the Haggadah, and I'll talk to you endlessly about the Haggadah. I even had a class a couple of years ago where we devoted an entire, I think, 6 months of study to the Haggadah, because I think that next to the Torah, obviously next to the Torah, it is the greatest book that we have in our tradition. And one day when my kids are older, I will put them through a longer Seder where we can actually go through the Haggadah in depth. I'm a big proponent of using the traditional text of the Haggadah in order to have a menu in front of you of all sorts of different teachings. You do not need a new interpretive version of the Haggadah. You just need your imagination, and I promise you, whatever you want to present at your Seder, I will find a hook for it somewhere in the teachings in the Haggadah. Instead of teaching about the Haggadah, I want to teach from the laws of Shabbat, and I'm going to explain where I'm going with this. My hope in the next 45 minutes or so, and then I'll take questions, is to educate you on the laws of Shabbat, what we do and what we don't do on Shabbat, with specific attention to one of the 39 forbidden categories of labor, and try and derive from there what I think is the true meaning of Pesach in Jewish theology. What we're supposed to be focused on Passover, that might surprise us, and how that ties into the concepts of covenant and freedom. Okay? A bit of an ambitious agenda, but let's see if we get there. I mentioned the 39 categories of forbidden labor on Shabbat. I'm going to guess that some of you have never heard of that before. Those who are not students of Hilchot Shabbat may not be aware of the 39 categories of forbidden labor. To give you an introduction to this, the Torah, on the when it talks about the observance of Shabbat, I'm pointing up to the 10 Commandments, which are somewhere above my head on the top of that ark. You'll see the 4th commandment is Zachor et Yom HaShabbat l'kadsho. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor, but on the 7th day, kol melacha lo ta'asu. You shall do no melacha. The Torah tells us not to do melacha, and if you look at translations for what that word means, melacha, you'll find the word labor, you'll find the word work. But I always tell people, if you think you're not allowed to do work on Shabbat, you're not going to understand the way Shabbat actually looks in many homes where it actually is hard work. It's not work that's prohibited on Shabbat. It's certain types of work that are prohibited. And the Torah doesn't do a great job at explaining to us what types of work are allowed and what types of work are not allowed. which is actually really strange. There's 613 laws in the Torah, and a couple of weeks ago, we learned how many cubits the sanctuary was in the building of the tabernacle. When the Torah wants to be detailed, it can be really detailed. But for some reason, when it comes to Shabbat, which seems so fundamental in terms of living a Jewish life, particularly today, it's the number one most important observance, I would argue, that we have in Judaism. The Torah doesn't give us a lot of specificity with regards to how it ought to be observed. Are you with me on this? If I gave you the 5 books of Moses and said, figure out how to keep Shabbat, would you know anything about challahs, candles, what you can do, what you can't do? You'd know a few things. Actually, someone once told me that there is a passage that says, Lo tiva'aru eish beyom HaShabbat. You shouldn't burn lights or candles or fire on Shabbat. Not that you shouldn't light them, you shouldn't have them burning. And that Karaites were a sect of Jews who only kept the written law. They wouldn't even heat their homes on Shabbat because they understood that the Torah means no fire at all can be burning on Shabbat, which is not the Shabbat that we observe. We have the rabbinic tradition to help us understand what melacha might mean. But I'm explaining this to you to give you a sense of, if you're following the Torah, your Shabbat might look very different than the Shabbat we actually follow today. And so we cannot look just at the Torah for an understanding about what melacha means. We need rabbinic sources. Rabbinic sources are sources that are much later, where the rabbis derive oral traditions, usually by finding an anchor in the text, something in the Torah that they might hint at that helps us understand. But many oral traditions are just oral traditions. They're observed because that's what we have in our hands, right? This is what my father taught me and my grandfather taught him, and so on and so on. For bonus points, for those gathered here, there is an anchor in the Torah. There is, and it was just read in synagogue a couple of weeks ago, there is an anchor in the Torah where the rabbis derive the prohibitions of Shabbat that are considered melacha. Does anyone know where the rabbis find that anchor in the Torah to define what work is not allowed on Shabbat? Mega bonus points. Really? Then I'm really happy I'm doing this class so we can learn something. Okay, great. Close. It's right at the beginning of Parshat Vayakhel. If you look at your sources on page 1, we're reading Parshat Vayakhel 2 weeks ago. Moses convoked Vayakhel, the whole Israelite community, and said to them, "These are the things that God has commanded you to do. On 6 days work may be done, but on the 7th day you shall have a Sabbath of complete rest, holy to God. Whoever does any melacha on it shall be put to death. You shall kindle no fire throughout your settlements on the Sabbath day." That's where the passage comes from before that I told you the Karaites observe. But that's all it says. Do you see that? It's one verse. You shall kindle no fire throughout your settlements on the Sabbath day. Okay. And it also says don't do any melacha. But what is melacha? Moses said further to the whole Israelite community, "This is what God has commanded. Take from among you gifts to God. Everyone whose heart is so moved shall bring them to God. Gifts for God, gold, silver, and copper." What are those last few verses talking about? The gifts to God. These are the contributions that the people made towards the building of the sanctuary. Parshat Vayakhel at the end of the book of Exodus is about the building of the sanctuary, the tabernacle. the Mishkan. Why is it that right before Moses gives instructions on the building of the sanctuary, does he say, keep Shabbat? This is Parshat Vayakhel. The Ten Commandments were already given. In other words, it's not to introduce Shabbat to the people. They already know about Shabbat. That was given with the Ten Commandments many parshas and verses earlier. So why would Moses repeat, don't forget, it's Shabbat? This is where the rabbis find their hook to understand what the prohibited labors on Shabbat must be. They interpret that Moses must have been telling the people before he tells them to bring their contributions to the building of the sanctuary, to keep in mind that those contributions and the building of the sanctuary can only take place on the 6 days of the week where labor is permitted. And therefore, the rabbis deduce all the labors which were required for the building of the sanctuary are the labors that are not allowed on Shabbat. Is everybody following me? How do we understand what melacha is? Melacha must be the 39 things that the rabbis will account for. They're there in your first source, that were involved in the building of the sanctuary. So I'm surprised that none of you knew this. I'm not saying that to make you feel bad. I'm just really happy that we're reviewing this. I have to do a better job at my sermon for Parshat Vayakhel next year. This is really important. Like I said, Shabbat is a weekly observance. We have to know what we're allowed to do and what we're not allowed to do on Shabbat and where it comes from. The Torah is rather vague, and the rabbis find their hook to understand what is not allowed with the building of the sanctuary. So if you look at the first source, the primary labors, the melacha, forbidden on Shabbat, are 40 less 1. And by the way, there's a lot of interesting things to say about why they say 40 less 1. 40 is a very important number in the Bible. But here they are: sowing, plowing, reaping, binding, sheaves, threshing, winnowing, selecting, grinding, sifting, kneading, baking, shearing wool, bleaching, hacking, hackling. I don't even know what hackling is. Hackling, dyeing, spinning, stretching the threads, making of 2 meshes, weaving 2 threads, dividing 2 threads. These are, and so on and so on. These are called the avot melacha. These are called the avot melacha, the core categories of forbidden labor on Shabbat. Before I say anything more, are you all with me? Everyone's with me. Where these laws come from, you now know there are 39 types of prohibited labor on Shabbat. These are all the labors that were involved in the building of the sanctuary, right? The sanctuary was made with skins of animals, so they had to kill the animals, so that's one of the forbidden labors. They had to tan the skin of the animal. They had to skin the animal itself. That's why these are all listed as the prohibited labors on Shabbat. I have a cool little book. I should have brought it in my office. It's a cartoon book called The 39 Avot Melacha on Shabbat. Feldheim produced it 20 years ago. I don't know if it's still being published. And it's a cartoon version of the 39 labors of Shabbat. Like there's a cartoon of a person, because I don't know what hackling is. So it's a picture. Oh, this is what help me, Michael?
It's clearing the thread.
Clearing the thread. Great. I'm not I don't even know what that is. What does that mean? To clear the thread. It's to separate the
Pulling away
the junk from the
hackles, the things that are attached to the thread.
Okay, great. I've never seen that or heard of it before. Therefore, I have a cartoon book that teaches me what hackling might be, and then I know I can't do that on Shabbat. Look, these were more relevant 100 years ago, when these were the types of labors that people were used to doing during the week, but these remain the avot melacha on Shabbat. Very important to know that. When you turn to the Mishnah, what's interesting is Mishnah, Tractate Shabbat, begins with a discussion on the last of the 39 melachot. What is the last of the 39 melachot? Hamotzi mereshut lereshut is in the Hebrew. Carrying out from one domain to the other. Carrying is not allowed on Shabbat. The melacha is called hotza'ah. Okay? So why is it that we see people carrying on Shabbat all the time? There you go. So this is a deeper discussion about when carrying is allowed and when carrying is not allowed. But major Jewish cities, like Toronto, have an eruv around certain neighborhoods. And the eruv distinguishes a reshut. A reshut is a territory, a property, or a domain is how it's often translated. And since you're in one domain, carrying your whatever it is, your talis, your could just be food. Usually it was food that you were bringing over for a Shabbat meal. Since it was, or a stroller, that's a big one, right? Since it's all one domain, it's considered okay. A few years ago, I don't know if you remember, the Eruv, there's a website, by the way, torontoeruv.com. Very cool to just see the Eruv. It's just an interesting thing to see it and where it is and how it works. But it is checked in Toronto. They check it every Friday morning. And you'll get on the website a green light saying, Eruv is good. Nobody does that anymore because a few years ago when the Eruv was down, there were it was like the world was coming to an end. I received 100 emails, text messages, tweets. Everybody was, do you remember this a few years ago when the Eruv was down? There was a snowstorm, and that means part of the Eruv was broken. And I learned from that experience, I never have to check the Eruv ever again, because if it's down, the whole world will find out. Because it is a big inconvenience if you think about it, particularly family with children who want to observe Hotza'ah. You can't take a stroller to synagogue. That's a form of carrying. So it impacts life in a significant way. And Hotza'ah is a serious, therefore, prohibition that people watch out for. The Mishnah Brura talks about every community purposefully picking a Shabbat where they would take the Eruv down. And apparently in South Africa, the chief rabbi used to do this. Beulah, maybe you remember. But apparently there was one Shabbat a year where they purposefully took down the Eruv. Why would they do that? Just to make you conscious of the fact. This could be just a Baba Maisa. But the Mishnah Berurah actually says, people are going to forget this because of an Eruv. They're going to forget that this exists. And so you should take it down once a year to have people be reminded that there is such a thing. And part of what I want to do today is explain to you why Hotza'ah is important, how it relates to Passover and teaches us something about Passover, and why it might be a good thing to have a Shabbat where we take down the Eruv and remind ourselves about what the prohibition of carrying might represent. Are you with me still? Okay, great. So I said at the beginning of the Mishnah in Tractate Shabbat, we go right away into the question of carrying from one domain to the other. The Mishnah is obsessed with this category. You can see that at the bottom of page 1. And the Talmud also seems bothered by this category. Let me show you in the Talmud where we can see evidence that the rabbis in the Talmud are bothered by this prohibition of carrying on Shabbat. I promise you I'm going to get to Pesach. Page 2. Follow with me on the top of the page, Bavli Shabbat 96b. Where in the Torah is the primary prohibition of carrying derived? Now this is quite something. I just explained to you where in the Torah the prohibitions are derived from. It's the building of the sanctuary. The Talmud does not seem to like that answer. Carrying, it's questioning, where does this come from that you can't carry on Shabbat? And listen to what Rabbi Yochanan answers. As the verse states, Moses commanded, and they proclaimed throughout the camp, let no man or woman do any more work for the sanctuary offering, and the people ceased. That is the verse. Now that's strange. That verse is when Moses says, it's a chapter later from the beginning of Vayakhel. Vayakhel begins chapter 35. This is chapter 36. Moses says, great, we have everything we need. Stop with all your contributions. The Talmud says this is the verse where we learn that carrying is not allowed. And Rabbi Yochanan explains why. Because Moses was sitting in the Levite camp, a public domain. Remember, Moses was a Levite. That's where he was. He was sitting in the Levite camp. And he told Israel, don't carry objects from your camp, from your domain, a private domain, into the Levite camp, which is a public domain. Talmud is always complicated. I promise you we're not doing a lot of Talmud tonight, but I do want you to understand this small piece of Talmud. The Talmud is saying the prohibition from carrying is not derived from the building of the sanctuary. It's derived from Moses himself, who on Shabbat told the people, don't bring your contributions, not anymore, which is how it appears in the Torah. Don't bring your contributions today. It's Shabbat. And on Shabbat, I don't want anyone bringing their contributions because I'm here with the sanctuary in my Levite camp, and you're in your camps, and if you're going to be bringing stuff from your camps, your gold, your copper, your silver, your animal hides, your threads, if you're bringing them here on Shabbat, you're going to be violating Shabbat. The Talmud says this is where we learn that you can't carry on Shabbat. All of the other 38 prohibitions, we learned a chapter earlier. This one stands apart. Why do you think the prohibition of carrying might stand apart from the other 38? Let's go back to page 1 and look again at the other labors. Sowing, plowing, reaping, binding, threshing, winnowing, selecting, grinding, sifting, kneading, baking, shearing, bleaching, hackling, dyeing, spinning, stretching the threads, making 2 meshes, weaving 2 threads, dividing 2 threads, tying, untying, sewing, tearing in order to sew 2 stitches, capturing a deer, slaughtering, fraying, salting it, curing its hide, scraping it of its hair, cutting it up, writing 2 letters, erasing in order to write 2 letters, building, pulling, extinguishing, kindling, striking with a hammer. Those are the other 38. How might you understand carrying to be a different kind of labor than everything else?
Doesn't create.
Very good. That's one possible answer that you actually find in the Or Zarua at the bottom of page 2. The Or Zarua is a medieval rabbinic, is a medieval commentary on the Talmud, and says at the bottom, it is a labor of lesser importance. For what kind of labor did he perform? I'm on the top of page 3. He took something out of a domain. It was an object from the beginning, and it is the same object now. So the Or Zarua says, this is a weird one. You didn't create anything with this labor. All the other 38, you changed something. At the end, it's no longer the same as it was at the beginning. But with carrying, with hotza'ah, it's the same object. You just moved it from one place to another. That's one explanation. Does anyone have another suggestion? Why is carrying different from the others? I have in the Hebrew, above the Or Zarua on page 2, other explanations that you can find. One says, Melacha she'ina, this is the Ramban. The Ramban says, I'll just translate for you. He says, how can it be that carrying a little, remember, carrying doesn't have to be a big thing. When I was in college, the big issue of carrying were our keys to get back into our dorms. When we think of carrying, don't just think about like a big box of food. You can think about just having a little key to your room was a problem on Shabbat. So some people in a place without an eruv, they had to hide it under a rock near the dorm so that we wouldn't have to carry it from one place to another. So the Ramban says, that's a forbidden labor on Shabbat. What kind of work or exertion is involved in carrying a key and putting it in your pocket? Barely weighs anything. That's the Ramban's.
If it was under the rock, you had to lift the rock to get
Good one. Okay, great. Maybe I put it behind the rock and not underneath it. Okay? But remember, melacha does not mean work. It means labor that's prohibited on Shabbat. We're trying to come up with a definition. If carrying a key is not allowed on Shabbat, it's hard to say that's work. Not a lot of work to carry a key from one place to another. By the way, you know how we did it? You know the trick to carrying a key? If ever you're in an observant community and you want to see who's really intense about their observance of Jewish law, and there's no eruv, you might see that they put it in the belt, so you're allowed to carry your clothes. Obviously, you're allowed to carry your clothes. So they put their key, you put your key in your belt. You put your key in your belt. The women very often will wear like a leather belt around their dress, and men will wear it around their pants, and they'll put the key, like the hole from the key in the, I don't know how you say it, but the metal bar in your key, and then it becomes part of your clothing, and then it's solved. Yes?
I've also seen, they'll take the key and they will entwine it in a hanky, and then put that in the pocket.
Interesting, because might be a leniency, because now it's an object. Now the key is not just a key. It's now being used to weigh down your handkerchief so it doesn't fly away. And it becomes part of your handkerchief, and you're allowed to carry a handkerchief. Am I? Okay, great. There's nothing like, I'm telling you, all this stuff, it sounds crazy, but doesn't it teach you how to think? It really does. It teaches you all the loopholes, how we get in and get around stuff when there are halachic obstacles that stand in our way. So carrying, the Ramban says, could be the problem. Another possible explanation that the Tosafot bring up is that remember, it's carrying from one domain to another. If I'm in my house and I want to move the couch, this happens a lot in Israel, like where homes are smaller, you're often having Shabbat dinner in your living room. So you have to move the couch back and forth. Are you allowed to move the couch back and forth in your home on Shabbat? You bet. And that's heavy, right?
Isn't that work?
Yeah, that's right.
So answer your question. Yes, but
For a reason, for a good reason.
work is allowed on Shabbat. Melacha is not. That's what I want to get across. Don't define melacha as work. Melacha are the things you're not allowed to do on Shabbat. So Tosafot says, wait. You can move your couch in your home, but you can't carry your key from inside to outside? That doesn't make sense. So hotza'ah in halacha is different. It's separate from the other 38. And I want to present to you why that might be the case. Okay, sorry, question.
Well, would it be, when you carry something from one domain to another, in Moses' situation, you carry something that's going to be used for construction or building something.
Yeah,
So you're taking something, carrying something to create something.
yeah.
And that's the prohibition, not necessarily not to carry. Maybe.
Could be, but what's interesting is the Talmud, when it explains where this prohibition comes from, it doesn't talk about the building of the sanctuary. It talks about Moses saying directly to the people, stop carrying anything, it's Shabbat. And actually the Tosafot says, Moses could have easily said, just, you know the rules, I already explained to you what Shabbat was. I don't need to tell you to stop. You should know it already. I said 6 days you're allowed to labor, but the 7th you can't. So if carrying was part of the building of the Mishkan, why does the Talmud choose a different verse to hang this prohibition on? Stay with me. I want you to think about whether my conclusion satisfies your curiosity. Marlene?
What's just been going through my mind, and I could create pretty well, maybe way off base.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I kept thinking about was carrying was part of their slavery in Egypt. And they
Awesome.
were carrying from one
Hold
place
that
to
thought.
the other.
Hold that thought.
Okay.
I'm getting there. But even with that thought in mind, take a look at Jeremiah. This is a really interesting source. Jeremiah, everybody knows, this is the prophet who prophesies of the destruction of Jerusalem in the 6th century BC. One of the reasons that he says that the temple is going to be destroyed is because people are not keeping Shabbat. And look at how Jeremiah phrases it. Thus says the Lord, take heed to yourselves. Do you see where I am? I'm on page 3. And bear no burden on the Sabbath day, nor bring it in by the gates of Jerusalem. He seems very concerned with what on Shabbat? Carrying stuff. Do not carry, lo totzi'u in the Hebrew. It's the same verb, hotza'ah. Don't carry forth a burden out of your houses on the Sabbath day. Neither do any work. Now this is interesting. V'chol melacha lo ta'asu. Jeremiah in verse 22 says, don't do hotza'ah, don't carry, and don't do melacha. Previously, I was explaining to you that hotza'ah is one of the 39 melachot. For Jeremiah, it seems not to be. For Jeremiah, there's melacha, and then there's hotza'ah. They're two separate prohibited activities on Shabbat. And Jeremiah is much earlier than the Mishnah, centuries earlier than the Mishnah. So if we're trying to historically understand, how did people keep Shabbat in the time of the temple? Jeremiah is giving us a hint, not that Shabbat was observed differently, but that there may have been as much of an emphasis, at least as much, on this one melacha of hotza'ah, this one prohibited thing called carrying, at least as much emphasis on that one as all the other 38 or even more. Whatever Jeremiah meant when he said, don't do any melacha. He only mentions two things, Jeremiah. Don't do hotza'ah and don't do melacha. I'll keep reading. But sanctify the Sabbath day as I commanded your fathers, but they didn't listen and did not turn their ear, but they made their neck stiff that they might not hear and they might not receive instruction. It shall happen if you diligently listen to me, says the Lord, says Hashem, to bring in no burden, there he goes again, bring in no burden through the gates of the city on the Sabbath day, but to make the Sabbath day holy, to do no work therein.
What do you mean by burden? Is it a thing or a feeling?
Not, you tell me, right? But I love this text from Jeremiah because Jeremiah is telling me why I wanted to give this class.
He's using the word work. And you said before that the work is different than these prohibitions.
So your comment, Roz, is how do we translate melacha? What I would have preferred to do if I was smart enough to edit this translation before the class, I would have erased that word work and changed it to melacha. Because what I'm submitting is, if you understand prohibited activities on Shabbat to be work, it's very difficult to have this conversation because that's not how it was understood or it is understood. Like I said, lifting that couch in your living room is work, but it's allowed. Melacha, though, in most English translations, is translated as either labor or work because we don't have a better term. Some people use the word creative labors. Creative labors. And I like that here in Jeremiah because it emphasizes the distinction between the two. Shabbat is observed, according to Jeremiah, in two fundamentally different ways. And we don't think of Shabbat like this. We just think of it as don't do any work. But that's not how Jeremiah looked at it. Jeremiah said, melacha, your work, and hotza'ah, carrying your burdens. You're transporting stuff, it seems, in the way he's describing those activities. Those are the two things that he says are going to get the temple destroyed. You have a question, Mike?
According to his words, only effective inside the gates of Jerusalem and not outside?
It would seem to me that here he's talking about particularly being offended by carrying taking place in Jerusalem. Now, why would he be angry at that? It could be because, if you're going to violate Shabbat, at least do it in private or outside of the holy city. You're doing it in a holy place. But it also could be that it is the city. And if you're carrying something in the city, why are you probably carrying it? It's to sell it, right? If you're carrying something at home, it could be for a different reason. It could be bringing something to somebody else. But in the city, in his time, you only went to the city to interact with other people and usually do commerce with them. And it's that commerce that bothers him, that's happening in the gates of Jerusalem. So I would say that would apply to Jerusalem and any other city. But he happens to be in Jerusalem. Doug?
So, right now we're focused on Kol Molechet Avodah Utasu.
Yeah.
But what about Shabbat B'Nafash? I mean, isn't that the basis of...
What does that mean to you? Shabbat
Well,
B'Nafash.
what it means is I shouldn't be doing anything that disturbs my rest and replenishment. So I'm curious as to whether there's a source that
Yeah.
goes with that as an emphasis.
So what you're talking about is very interesting, and we can open up a whole, this is for next year's discussion.
Okay.
There is, melacha is what's called a negative commandment. The Torah has 613 commandments, 365 are positive. Oh, I might be getting this confused. There's 248 of one and 365 of the other. One is negative, one is positive. Somebody chat GPT that for me. I have to remember. There are negative commandments which begin with thou shalt not, such as thou shalt not do any melacha on Shabbat. There is also a positive commandment that on the seventh day you shall rest. That's a positive commandment.
Study.
Okay? Just like we have a big problem, right? Study might be one way of resting. But just like we have a problem with what does that mean? I can't do any melacha. Define that for me. We also have a big problem with what does it mean that I have to rest on Shabbat? Again, there's a lot of things we do on Shabbat that are not restful. What does rest mean? I have to nap for 24 hours? Am I allowed to go to the gym? Am I allowed to listen to music if that's restful? Am I allowed to go shopping if I find that spiritually replenishing? I mean, what you're doing, Doug, you might think you're settling the problem, but you're actually making it much worse.
I didn't think I was settling.
Yeah, you're making it much worse, which is a whole other category. We call that in Jewish law shavut. Shavut. And almost all of the rabbinic prohibitions of Shabbat derive from the positive commandment, thou shalt rest. And the rabbis say, well, we better define that for you. Right? So I'm with you. I just think I only have a few more minutes, and I'll need another hour for that. So I want to stick with the negative commandment. The negative commandments which are bothering Jeremiah. Number 1, don't do any melacha. Number 2, don't carry.
Is there a definition of the Hebrew for burden? Like when, to me, okay, I understand don't carry something, a burden, but when I have a little child, I don't consider that a burden. I mean, it probably is, but in reality, it's not a burden. And I don't think it's the same, like I don't know what the Hebrew for burden is, but I can't imagine that relates to it.
Right.
Doesn't make sense.
Yeah, that's a deeper discussion about what are you allowed, what might you be allowed to carry, and what might you not allowed to be, what might you not allowed to be able to carry, right? So this is the debate about your clothing. Right? If I can't carry a key, why can't I carry my shirt?
For your talit.
Or my talit, right? So there are all sorts of different discussions about what is a burden and what is not a burden. But if I would define it for you, you still have to agree with me that carrying is a big no-no for Jeremiah at least. And even in the Talmud, there's a recognition that carrying is different from all the other 38. And even in your minds, you suggested to me, carrying is different. You're not really creating anything new. And if the whole purpose of Shabbat is to remember that God rested on the seventh day from his creation, God stopped from the labors, the creative labors he was doing. Why would it bother God that I'm moving something from place A to place B? I have not created a thing. Unless we observe Shabbat not only to commemorate God's creating the world, but also to commemorate a historical event that happened a couple of thousand years after the world was created in Egypt, which is true. You know this if you know Kiddush. Kiddush is at the bottom of page 3. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kitanu tzavav v'ratzavanu b'shabbat kodsho b'avav ratzon yinkilanu zikaron lema'aseh. Let's start with zikaron lema'aseh v'reshit. Ki hu yom tefila lemikra'ei kodesh. Zeker what? Very good. Zeker litziat Mitzrayim. In the words of the Kiddush, okay, which we recite every Friday night, and you're going to recite it next week on Wednesday as well. You're going to talk about not only the Shabbat as a manifestation of remembering the creation of the world, but also remembering that it commemorates Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Exodus. This is very clear in the Torah, not just in the Kiddush. At the top of page 4, you see I have on the right-hand side from Exodus 20, remember the Sabbath day to sanctify, because in 6 days Hashem made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that is in them. And on the left-hand side, I have from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 5, observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy, as Hashem your God commanded you. You shall remember that you were a servant in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out of there by a mighty hand and by an outstretched arm. Therefore Hashem your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. It is pretty obvious right, why Shabbat is observed in memory of the creation of the world. Right? God rested on the 7th day, so do we. Gotcha. Why do we say Zeker Litziat Mitzrayim on Friday night at Kiddush? Why is Shabbat a remembrance of Egypt?
We couldn't have Shabbat in Egypt.
What's that?
We could not have Shabbat.
Very good. So that's Maimonides. Maimonides says you can't have Shabbat in Egypt because you don't control your own time. And that's why when we claim that it is Shabbat with the Kiddush, we take hold of our time and it reminds us of our freedom. The problem is that the response to that is, well, there's a lot of people who waste time today too. In other words, we're still enslaved by time in some way. I mean, I like Maimonides. I think they're unfair, the criticisms of his. But I do think that's a core understanding of why Shabbat is in remembrance of Egypt. But why else might you think that the story we're going to tell next week has to do with Shabbat?
They have to work 7 days a week. There was no rest at all.
Right? That's similar to what Doug said. There was no Shabbat in Egypt, so we claim it now and saying this is the symbol of our freedom, that we have ownership of our time. Excellent. Any other ideas?
We didn't get the commandments until after we left.
Very good. The commandments came for Shabbat only when they were free, so we wouldn't have any commandment, including Shabbat, unless we were free. Other ideas?
And that's when we became a nation.
Tell me more.
When we left Egypt is when we were people without sort of any boundaries or rules, and then we became a nation when we left.
Sort of. I would say yes, we did become a nation when we left, but we were a nation before we left too. Pharaoh knew who the Hebrew slaves were, right?
Not in the same way.
But yes, so tell me, how were we different when we left as a nation?
We had responsibilities.
Yes,
We did make choices.
good. Choices, excellent. Responsibilities?
The concept of freedom and Shabbat should be a free day and.
Great, right? A day where a day of freedom from what? From work?
From our burdens.
I don't like work, but I like that. From our burdens.
From
From
responsibility.
responsibilities. I like that. Yes, Helen?
It's also a subtle reminder, being such an important part of our history, of what God has done for us.
Yes, for sure. Right? The relationship between the nation and God really begins with the Exodus from Egypt. One of the troubling parts of the story is that this nation doesn't seem to like God very much, and you could understand why. When they were slaves, when Moses says, hey, there's this guy I talked to called Hashem, and he says he's going to free you from Egypt, the people almost chase away Moses and kill him. So the relationship in earnest only begins with God when the Exodus from Egypt happens. And maybe that's what we commemorate on Shabbat. If you see two key passages on page 4, Exodus 12 and Exodus 16, the word or the verb hotza'ah appears in connection to the Exodus from Egypt. In Exodus 12, this is when the final plague happens, the slaying of the firstborn. At the end of verse 22, lo teitzu ish mipetach beito ad boker. Hotza'ah lo teitzu. When the Exodus happens, and on Wednesday night next week, remember the pivotal moment in the Exodus from Egypt is Makat Bechorot. That is the moment when everything changes, when the narrative turns. The slaying of the firstborn. And this word, hotza'ah, appears in the Torah right there. No person shall leave his house. You saw the Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston? Like, when the green smoke comes around, starts killing everybody, everyone's in their homes, sort of afraid of leaving. Al teitzu, don't leave, don't carry. And then again in Exodus 16, lo teitzu appears when on the journey in the wilderness, when the people are looking for sustenance and the manna falls from heaven, the word appears again. Lo al yetzeh ish minkomo bayom hashvi'i. Don't go out on the seventh day to get your manna. You're not going to get any. The manna came yesterday. It came on Friday. God gave you a double portion. This is, by the way, why we have two challahs on Shabbat, right? To remember the double portion that came on Friday. So hotza'ah appears in these two narratives that are strongly connected with the Exodus from Egypt. And what I want to submit to you, I'm not the first that's done it, or that said this, but I want to submit to you that this forbidden part of Shabbat labor, carrying on Shabbat, is directly related to the experience of Exodus from Egypt. And that it is meant to be observed every week because it speaks to us about the nature of freedom that our ancestors achieved at Pesach. And it's a nature of freedom that's a bit counterintuitive. I've spoken about this before, about the misunderstanding that some people have about freedom being freedom to do whatever I want to do. Right? And if you have that conception of freedom, what's called freedom from, you're going to say, I don't understand. Why are we celebrating freedom by sitting around a table and reading a text called a Seder, which means order, and following all of these rules and things that we have to do? Like, what kind of freedom is this? It seems like freedom actually means something else, not freedom from, but a different kind of freedom that involves covenant, responsibility, loyalty to tradition, and I think a way of interacting with each other. This point is driven home by a famous rabbi named Samson Raphael Hirsch, who wrote a brilliant commentary to the Torah in the 19th century. This is the English translation. It's a German commentary. Have you heard of that name before, Samson Raphael Hirsch? One of the great modern Orthodox rabbis in Germany in the 19th century. Look what he writes at the bottom of page 4. If we look for the common idea underlying all the other melachot, we find that they all show man's position as master of all things of the physical world. The 38 are about, on Shabbat, stopping from doing things that involve manipulating stuff, the natural world. Hotza'ah, however, is different. You're not manipulating anything with Hotza'ah. It belongs strictly to the social sphere. What are we typically doing when we're carrying on Shabbat? Well, it's either we're bringing stuff to sell, or we're schlepping things like food to somebody's house, or it's social, right? It's the only one of the 39 melacha that involves human interaction. If there's no human interaction, why am I carrying? I'm only carrying because there's somebody or some reason involving other people that I need to bring a thing from one place to another. It's not for me. It's for others. Accordingly, if the isur is the prohibition. If the prohibition of all the other melachot subordinates man to God as regards his position in the physical world. So when I observe all those other 38, Rabbi Hirsch is saying is, on Shabbat you recognize that God is the master of the physical world. And therefore I acknowledge that by one day a week not playing with the physical world. The isur, the prohibition of hotza'ah, apparently expresses man's subordination to God as regards his position in the social world. Not only is God creator of the world, but God is the force, the morals, the boundaries of the way we need to interact with each other. And by observing the prohibition of carrying, which ironically we don't really do anymore because there's an eruv, but imagine there's none. By observing this prohibition, I declare God isn't just in charge of the natural world, which is actually easier to understand. I get that I didn't create that tree. I get that I needed to, that me planting a seed and watching it grow is not something that I can do. That's miraculous. That's part of the way God made the world. That a seed should respond to water and sunlight and grow into nourishment. That's easier. But it's harder to say, I'm not in charge of my social relationships. Because I can control people if I want to. And I can manipulate others if I want to. What business does God have getting involved in human relationships, in the social sphere? And perhaps it took until that moment, when our ancestors were freed from Egypt, for God to appear in a different form, not only as the master of the physical world, which was a God we knew and understood since Genesis 1. God created the physical world. Got it. But when the exodus from Egypt happened, a different side of God appeared. This God was so outraged by what human beings could do to other human beings that this God appeared and said, that stops too. Not only did I stop creating the physical world on the seventh day and make that an eternal memorial for the Jewish people, I also will bring this people out of Egypt and make that too an eternal memorial people, an eternal memorial to the Jewish people. That I am a God who fundamentally stands on the dignity of every human being. This is Zeker Lemase Bereshit. Let me read to you what I wrote down as my own final thoughts on the fourth page, and then I'll take your questions, comments, challenges, whatever you want to say. Let me just read the last two paragraphs. Page 5. This all yields a profound and disquieting insight. Human sovereignty is limited not only in the natural realm, but in the social realm as well. While one might concede that mastery over nature is ultimately illusory, this is what I was trying to say. It's easy for us to concede that we're not the masters over nature. The rain that is falling now, I can't make it stop. That comes from God. There remains a persistent assumption that one retains control over one's environment, domain, and relationships. Okay, I can't stop the rain from falling, but I can subordinate other people to my authority. God has no involvement in that. The laws governing the transfer between private and public spaces, that's Hotza'ah, challenge this assumption at its core, asserting that even the structures of society, the boundaries we construct, the spaces we inhabit, and the frameworks within which we relate to others are not fully subject to human ownership or control. This recognition carries significant ethical and spiritual implications, shaping how authority is exercised, how power and possession are understood, and how community is conceived, not as an object of domination, but as a sacred trust. And you can read the final paragraph yourself. It's me just insisting and repeating the same thing. There's a beautiful insight on the Haggadah that I try and share every year with my family, and that I think I might write about it for the Manishma tomorrow, as it relates to this. In the Haggadah, the 4 questions are asked slightly different. Let me start from the beginning. The 4 questions. Ma nishtana halayla hazeh. Let's go through. Shebechol halayla anu ochlim chametz umatzah. Great. Shebechol halaylot anu ochlim she'ar yirakot halayla hazeh maror. I better get in shape. I got less than a week. Shebechol halaylot einanu matpilim afilu pam echad halayla hazeh shetei pamim. Shebechol halaylot anu yoshvin בין יושבים ובין מסובים, הלילה הזה כולנו מסובים. That word kulanu, why does it appear only with the fourth question in Manishtana? Why doesn't it say, kulanu ochlim matzah? Kulanu ochlim maror. Kulanu matbilim shtei pa'amim. Have you ever noticed this before? That word kulanu, which means what? We all, everyone together, only appears with the fourth question, even though it could equally apply to the previous three. We're all doing the same things, right? The experience of the Seder is supposed to be one that emphasizes the equality of everyone at the table. In the ancient world, the only people who were reclining were the elites of society. If you were not reclining, you must have been a slave or a servant. You're up there serving people, you're walking around, or maybe you're sitting and waiting to be called up to do something. The only people in the ancient world who were reclining were people who were not serving others. Even though we all eat matzah, we all dip twice, we all eat maror, this emphasis on reclining over and over and over again at the Seder, when you drink your wine, and that's emphasized also in the four questions, kulanu mesubin, all of us, is meant to emphasize this is a holiday with social ramifications. Part of a religion with social ramifications. Part of a religion that institutionalized this an observance every week on Shabbat that reminds us of the social ramifications of this religion. Not carrying is like the opposite, or it's like the equivalent of reclining at the Passover Seder. Carrying is what was done in Egypt. Carrying is death. Carrying means I'm enslaved to something. Like you're going out to get your manna, which when the Torah says, Al Yetzu, don't go out and get your manna on the seventh day. Your food, your sustenance. Don't be searching for that. You have 6 other days to worry about that. The seventh day, God is making a more important declaration. That God is master not only over creation, but over the interpersonal. This, to me, is the core meaning of Passover that often gets caught in a misunderstanding of what freedom means. Because we think that freedom means I can do what I want. But freedom is actually a declaration in Judaism that we are free to be part of a covenant based on ideals and principles that are our legacy, that are our heritage, that we're moving away from slavery to a pharaoh who represents everything that is totally against what I'm speaking about today. Pharaoh is hierarchy. Egypt is the most hierarchical society in the ancient world, where Pharaoh not only is above everyone else, he is the god that needs to be worshipped. Right? The god of the Nile, the one who has control over everything, the god of the sun. Right? Ra is the name of the sun in Egypt. The name often given to pharaohs. Pharaoh is the sun. the most hierarchical world which declares that if you are born a slave, that is how you will remain. Right? We move away from that, and this is what happened on Pesach. It's not that we became free. It's that we moved from worshiping an idol, a falsehood, and changed to being bound in a different set of obligations, but one that affirm above all the equality and the dignity of every person at the table. Kulanu mesubin. In our seders, all of us recline. We're all together. Nobody, and maybe, this is just my thing, okay? You can carry something on you when you're standing. You can carry something on your lap when you're sitting, but you can't really carry anything when you're reclining. I don't know if that's might be taking this a little too far. But to me, if carrying is the display of social, what Jeremiah talked about in Jerusalem as carrying is the sign of a slave. It's the sign of servitude. Whether it's servitude to Pharaoh or just servitude to economy, to burden. Reclining is the very opposite. It's the total opposite of carrying. Reclining is, I have no burden. I have no worry. I am free. I can be who I want. I can, together with the people around my table, experience a moment of the world as it ought to be. That's my spiel for tonight. Okay, so questions, thoughts, challenges, go ahead. I'll take, what time is it? I have a few more. Let's take 5 minutes, yeah.
According to your version of
Yeah.
We should all, around the table, all of us should be reclining at the Seder.
Yeah.
Not just the person who leads the Seder. And I've been at a certain number of Sedorim in my mix
Yeah.
of life, and I have never seen a Seder anywhere where anybody reclines.
Really? Anyone else here? When you drink your 4 cups. When you have to tell everybody at the Seder, when you're drinking the 4 cups specifically, the 4 cups are meant to be drunk while reclining. And everybody drinks the 4 cups of wine.
And I have seen always.
Am I crazy? Is that right? Sasha, you're nodding your head. This is what's done at your Seder, right? That's right. Not just the leader of the Seder. Everyone. Yes, but look. Yeah. Will you please, everybody, if you're at a Seder like that, where nobody's reclining, I've given you a lot of material tonight to share with everybody why. Remember, if only the leader is doing it, you're defeating the whole purpose of the Manishtana's Kulanu Mesubin. Everybody's got to do it, because here at the Seder, we might have a leader, but we don't have a taskmaster. We are all free. The leader isn't doing things for us. We all participate in the reclining at the Seder because there's a social statement that we make. The social statement that Jeremiah, look, when I try and connect the lines between the Seder today, to the Seder in the Talmud, to the Seder in the Mishnah, to what Jeremiah is complaining about, to what the Torah itself wants Shabbat to be. This might be going a little bit too far, so I might delete this if this goes on the YouTube video. But it's almost like the 38 creative labors, the first 38, are not sufficient. And that this extra one, the rabbis in the Mishnah needed to add because such an important part of Jewish life was missing. And Shabbat cannot just be about me and God. That's not our religion. We have law after law and chapter after chapter about how we relate to each other. This is the Torah is not a book that just tells us how many times a day we have to pray. It's a book that tells us how to be honest in our business dealings and how to love other people and how to honor our parents and etc., etc. And this whole component of what God is has to be a part of our Shabbat observance. And when Jeremiah is screaming, I think that's what he's screaming about. You're not doing any melacha, fine, you're not lighting a match. But what really aggravated Jeremiah is you're also carrying a burden in Jerusalem, which means you're doing business.
We don't recline on Shabbat when we're drinking the wine.
But you ought to keep Hotza'ah in a dream world. We have an Erev, so you don't have to. But what I'm telling you is the Shabbat version of this is the melacha of Hotza'ah. If we can't observe it, at least let's learn about it so that we can say, well, this is part of our tradition, even though the Erev sort of magically gets rid of it. Maybe we should take it down once a year so that we could remind ourselves. But, I just feel like it's important to review Hotza'ah once in a while so we know that this is an important part of Shabbat that testifies to a different aspect of our faith that might be much more relevant today than it was in the past. Although I'm not sure about that. I'm actually not sure. I think Jeremiah was just as angry about that as I am today.
Jeremiah was here today, he's very angry about the Erev.
About the Erev, yeah. Right.
You're using technicality to get around something that wasn't meant to be get around.
Yeah. We have to remember that that economy, business, it's a wonderful thing. It improves the world. The Torah commands us to do it for 6 days of the week. But there's one day when the Torah asks us to step back and say, all business contains some form of power over another person. All business. I've got something you want, and I'm asking you for it, right? For money in exchange for it, no matter what you're doing. Right? There is something that you have that another person needs. There's some power relationship, which is fine. We can negotiate that 6 days a week, but there's one day where God says, I want you to be conscious of that power relationship. To know that if that becomes unbounded, right, then we can create a world where truly people's positions in society can be permanently, it could turn into Egypt, right? And people who are permanently needy become basically the slaves. And, I really worry about this in the world we live in. This is a world where the wealth gap between the haves and the have-nots is growing increasingly wide. And I think the Torah is saying that's the direction of Egypt. The direction of Egypt is where some people have a lot and a lot of people have nothing. And that's not the ideal. I'm not telling you the Torah is communist. I don't think the Torah is communist. I do think that the Torah speaks to us always in a critical voice, asking us to think carefully about the way we live our lives in the interpersonal realm, and reminds us about boundaries, right? And Pharaoh is what we want to move away from, carrying burdens, standing, and going back to this world of our Passover Seders, which is a world of no carrying, a world of reclining, a world of kulanu mesupin, everyone's equality, just for a couple of nights to have that taste of what the God of Israel represents. Okay, last question. Stan.
This is a very interesting discussion, a marvelous discussion, because it's really getting at what it means to be a Jew. Now, this guy, Brett Stevens, says that's the way to fight anti-Semitism. We're not doing it correctly because we have to get back to exactly what you're talking about tonight. What's your opinion? I mean, I don't know, it's a debatable.
Look, I've dedicated my life to trying not to fighting anti-Semitism, but to strengthening Jewish people. So
That's what we need.
you're speaking my language, right? Yes. Not that I think we don't need to fight anti-Semitism. We have to do that too. But I agree with you. There's so much that we have to be proud of, and so much that we have that we can stand upon and say, hold on. This small, tiny people, 0.2% of the world population, has contributed so much to the development, the positive development of human society, and it didn't come from nowhere, and we shouldn't move away from that too quickly. And Pesach is the greatest holiday to reconnect to Jewish values. You know, it's like I said at the beginning of my class, on every page of the Haggadah, there are insights on which to stand and which to be proud of. So I hope you'll have a chance to do that with your family, and I think that is maybe not the best way to fight anti-Semitism, but certainly a way to strengthen who we are, and the haters will hate. Okay, thank you everybody. Have a great night, and thank you again. This was really nice to see all these people here.